At 10:43 p.m. Eastern Time, millions of Americans received the same emergency alert. Phones vibrated, televisions interrupted programming, radio stations suddenly went silent. Then a black screen appeared, white text, no logo, no agency, no explanation, just a single sentence. If you hear your name outside tonight, do not answer. Most people laughed. Some thought it was a marketing stunt. Others assumed someone had hacked the emergency alert system. But before sunrise, people began disappearing, and every one of them reported the same thing before they vanished. Someone calling their name from outside. If you enjoy psychological horror, dark mysteries, disturbing investigations, and analog horror, subscribe now, because tonight's case becomes stranger with every detail, and by the end, you may never answer a voice in the dark again. 28-year-old Ethan Walker was working the night shift as a paramedic in Columbus, Ohio. He had spent years responding to emergencies, car accidents, overdoses, house fires, heart attacks, the kinds of things that leave most people unable to sleep. But nothing in his career prepared him for what happened that night. At exactly 10:43 p.m., his phone vibrated. The emergency alert appeared. Ethan stared at the screen, then laughed. The message felt ridiculous. If you hear your name outside tonight, do not answer. He showed it to his partner. Both men joked about it, then returned to work. For nearly 2 hours, nothing happened. Calls came in, patients were transported. Everything felt normal. Then shortly after midnight, dispatch received a call. A woman sounded terrified. The operator asked what was wrong. The woman whispered, "Someone is outside calling my name." At first, dispatch assumed it was a trespassing complaint. Then the caller added something strange. "He sounds exactly like my husband." The operator checked her file. According to records, her husband had died 7 months earlier. The line disconnected. Police arrived 8 minutes later. The front door was open, the lights were on, the television was running, but the woman was gone. No signs of forced entry, no struggle, no explanation, just an empty house and a phone still lying on the kitchen floor. By 2:30 a.m., similar calls began appearing across multiple states. Different cities, different neighborhoods, same story. Someone outside, calling their name. The voices always sounded familiar. A parent, a sibling, a spouse, a close friend, someone trusted, someone impossible. One teenager claimed he heard his grandmother calling from the backyard. She had died 4 years earlier. A retired teacher reported hearing her brother knocking at the front door. He had been buried nearly a decade ago. A father in Michigan told investigators he heard his daughter crying outside. The problem? His daughter was asleep upstairs. Every report sounded impossible. Yet every report followed the same pattern. And before sunrise, 17 people had vanished. By morning, screenshots of the alert flooded social media. Millions of people had received it. Nobody knew where it came from. News stations began reporting on the phenomenon. Experts were interviewed. Cybersecurity teams were contacted. Federal agencies were questioned. Every response was the same. No organization claimed responsibility. No emergency network showed evidence of intrusion. No source could be identified. It was as if the alert had appeared out of nowhere. For a few hours, the story dominated the internet. Then something strange happened. Videos disappeared, articles vanished, posts were deleted, entire discussions went offline. The deeper people looked, the harder information became defined, and that only made the mystery worse. At 7:14 a.m., detectives reviewed the first usable Ring camera recording. The footage came from a suburban home in Pennsylvania. The homeowner had vanished during the night. The camera showed an empty front porch. Nothing moved, no visitors appeared, no vehicles passed, no shadows crossed the frame. Then the audio captured something. A voice, soft, calm, friendly, calling the homeowner's name, again and again and again. The strange part wasn't the voice, it was where the voice came from. Audio technicians later discovered the source didn't remain in one location. One moment it appeared near the driveway. The next moment it seemed to come from behind the house, then directly beside the camera, as if the sound wasn't traveling normally, as if distance didn't matter. Yet despite everything, the victim still opened the door. The footage ends seconds later. Nobody ever saw him again. At first, investigators believed someone was using recordings, a coordinated hoax, a criminal operation, maybe even a large-scale social experiment. Then later that afternoon, they discovered evidence that destroyed every normal explanation. One of the recorded voices had been identified. Investigators traced it to an old voicemail archive. The voice belonged to a woman named Linda Carter. There was only one problem. The recording being used was newer than her death certificate. According to official records, Linda Carter had died 3 years earlier, and somehow, her voice had appeared on a stranger's ring camera the night of the broadcast. That discovery changed everything, because for the first time, investigators were forced to consider a possibility nobody wanted to discuss. What if the voices weren't recordings, and what if they weren't human? Most people moved on within days. The internet found new distractions. News cycles shifted, and the strange broadcast slowly faded from public attention. But Ethan Walker couldn't let it go. Something about the case felt wrong. Not mysterious, not confusing, wrong. 17 people had vanished in a single night. Every victim received the same warning. Every victim heard a familiar voice, and every victim disappeared after responding. That wasn't coincidence. That was a pattern, and patterns meant answers. Ethan began spending his free time investigating. At first, he reviewed public reports, then archived videos, then witness interviews, then police scanner recordings. The deeper he looked, the stranger the case became, because every explanation eventually collapsed. Hackers couldn't explain the voices, criminals couldn't explain the disappearances, and psychological mass hysteria couldn't explain the recordings. Especially the recordings. 4 days after the broadcast, an anonymous user uploaded a file to a small internet forum. The title was simple: raw audio, nothing else. No description, no explanation. The recording lasted 27 seconds. Most listeners heard only static, wind, distortion, background noise. But audio engineers heard something very different. Beneath the static, hundreds of voices overlapped one another. Male voices, female voices, young voices, old voices, all speaking simultaneously. Yet somehow, listeners only focused on one, the voice most familiar to them, the voice they trusted, the voice they missed. One audio expert later described it as a crowd pretending to be a single person. Another described it differently. It sounds like something learning how humans speak. The file disappeared less than an hour after being uploaded, but by then, copies already existed, and Ethan downloaded one, a decision he would later regret. That night, Ethan listened to the recording alone, headphones on, lights off, apartment silent. The audio sounded harmless at first. Static, wind, distortion, nothing unusual. Then he heard it, a word hidden beneath the noise, a single word. His name, Ethan. The sound was faint, almost impossible to hear, yet once he noticed it, he couldn't unhear it. Again and again he replayed the file, and every time the voice remained, Ethan, Ethan, Ethan. At first he convinced himself it was imagination, his brain creating patterns where none existed, audio pareidolia, stress, exhaustion, anything but the obvious explanation, because the obvious explanation was impossible. The following night, Ethan woke suddenly. His bedroom was completely silent, no traffic, no neighbors, no television, nothing. Then he heard it, Ethan. The voice came from outside, soft, calm, almost friendly. His eyes opened instantly, his heart began racing. For several seconds, he remained frozen, listening. Then it happened again. Ethan. The voice sounded painfully familiar. His younger brother, Duff, the same brother who had died 6 years earlier. The same voice, the same tone, the same cadence, exactly the same. Every instinct told him to get up, to look, to check the window, to confirm what he was hearing. Instead, he remembered the warning. If you hear your name outside tonight, do not answer. The voice called again, closer this time. Then something impossible happened. The location changed. One moment it came from outside the apartment. The next, it seemed to come from the hallway, then outside his bedroom window, then outside his front door, as if distance meant nothing, as if location itself no longer mattered. For nearly 10 minutes, the voice continued. Then suddenly, it stopped. The silence that followed felt worse. The next morning, Ethan tracked down one of the few known survivors, Rachel Morgan, Indiana, 32 years old, one of only 3 confirmed people who heard the voice and refused to respond. Rachel agreed to speak, but only on one condition: no recordings, no cameras, no names. She was terrified. Even months later, according to Rachel, the voice belonged to her mother. A perfect imitation. Every detail was correct: the accent, the tone, the expressions. even private childhood phrases, things nobody else should have known. Yet something felt wrong. Not obviously wrong, just slightly off, enough to create doubt. Then Rachel noticed something disturbing. The voice never breathed, not once, no inhaling, no pauses, no hesitation. It spoke continuously, perfectly, like something that understood speech, but didn't understand people. And that tiny detail saved her life, because she never opened the door. As more evidence surfaced, analysts discovered something horrifying. People weren't disappearing after hearing the voice. They disappeared after answering it. The distinction mattered. Victims who ignored the voice survived. Victims who responded vanished. The pattern appeared in every case, every report, every investigation, every witness statement. One response, one acknowledgement, one mistake. Then they were gone. The realization changed everything. The broadcast wasn't predicting disappearances. The broadcast was warning people, trying to prevent them, trying to stop them from answering. But that created a new question. If the warning was real, who sent it, and why? 2 weeks later, a leaked internal memo appeared online. Most people ignored it. Ethan didn't. The document was heavily redacted. Nearly every paragraph was blacked out, except for 3 lines. 3 lines that terrified everyone who read them. The first read, "Entities appear unable to initiate direct contact without voluntary acknowledgement." The second read, "Subjects who verbally respond demonstrate significantly higher disappearance rates." The third read, "They only need acknowledgement once." Nobody knew who wrote the document. Nobody knew where it came from. But investigators across multiple agencies treated it seriously. Very seriously. Because by that point, the number of missing persons had reached 31. And still, nobody had returned. If you heard the voice of someone you lost years ago calling your name outside your house tonight, would you answer? Or would you stay inside? Let me know in the comments. Because what investigators discovered next would become the most disturbing evidence in the entire case. 5 days after the broadcast, investigators recovered the most infamous recording associated with the incident. A recording that would eventually become known as the Kentucky recording. The victim never returned, but the final audio survived. And according to those who heard it, the recording contained something impossible. Because near the end, 2 different voices began speaking. One voice begged the victim to answer. The other voice begged him not to. And what happened next changed the entire investigation. The Kentucky recording lasted only 1 minute and 12 seconds, but according to investigators, it changed the entire case. The victim was 34-year-old Michael Harper. At approximately 3:11 a.m., he activated the voice recorder on his phone. The first 30 seconds sound normal. Footsteps, heavy breathing, the creaking of an old house settling during the night. Then a voice appears, soft, calm, familiar, calling Michael's name again and again and again. Investigators later confirmed the voice belonged to Michael's mother. There was only one problem. His mother had died 11 years earlier. At first, Michael ignores it. The recording captures him whispering, "It's not real." The voice continues, "Michael, it's me. Come outside." The tone becomes more emotional, more convincing, more familiar. Then something unexpected happens. A second voice appears, weak, distant, terrified. The second voice whispers, "Don't answer." Michael freezes. The first voice continues, "Michael." The second voice returns, stronger this time, "Don't answer." Investigators enhanced the recording repeatedly, and every time they reached the same conclusion. The second voice wasn't coming from outside, it was coming from inside Michael's house. Then came the final seconds, the moment that became infamous. The first voice says, "Open the door." The second voice suddenly screams, "It's already inside." The recording ends immediately afterward. Michael Harper was never seen again. The Kentucky recording destroyed the last normal explanation. For Ethan, the case was no longer a mystery. It was a warning. Then he received an email. No sender, no subject, no identifying information, only one attachment, a heavily redacted government document. Most of the pages were completely blacked out, but one paragraph remained visible, a paragraph Ethan would never forget. It read, "Entities appear unable to initiate direct contact without voluntary acknowledgement." Below it, another sentence. "Subjects who verbally respond demonstrate significantly higher disappearance rates." Then a final line, a line investigators had apparently highlighted. "They only need acknowledgement once." Ethan stared at the screen. Suddenly everything made sense. The voices weren't forcing people outside. They were waiting for permission, waiting for a response, waiting for someone to answer. Months passed. Public interest faded. Most people forgot. But Ethan continued searching. Then he discovered something impossible. Several amateur radio operators had recorded fragments of the original transmission. When analysts compared the signals, they noticed something strange. The broadcast didn't behave like a normal emergency alert. The signal appeared to originate from everywhere simultaneously. No source, no tower, no identifiable origin point. One analyst later described it this way. It looked less like a transmission and more like a reply. A reply to what? Nobody knew. But one disturbing possibility emerged. The alert may never have been the threat. The alert may have been the warning. Someone or something may have been trying to stop people from responding. Nearly a year after the incident, Ethan met a retired communications engineer, one of the few people who had worked directly with emergency broadcast infrastructure. The engineer agreed to speak, but only off the record. No names, no recordings, no documentation. According to him, the original signal contained hidden information, data buried beneath the broadcast, information that was never publicly released. Ethan asked what it said. The engineer remained silent for several seconds, then answered, "It wasn't talking to us." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" The engineer replied, "The message wasn't addressed to people." Then he stood up, ended the interview, and refused to answer another question. By 2027, the incident had become an internet legend. Most people assumed it was exaggerated. Others believed it never happened. Then on October 29th, thousands of people reported receiving another transmission, not through television, not through radio, not through emergency systems, through their phones. Screens turned black, white text appeared. The message contained only one sentence: "We found the people who answered." Within hours, screenshots flooded social media. Authorities denied involvement. Again. Experts couldn't explain it. Again. Then 1 hour later, a second message appeared. 3 words: "They are calling." Panic spread immediately because millions of people remembered the original incident. And this time, the message wasn't a warning. It was a status update. 2 days later, an anonymous audio file appeared online. No title, no description, no explanation. Just 9 seconds of sound. The recording begins with static, then hundreds of overlapping voices. Women, children, elderly voices, thousands of whispers speaking simultaneously. Then suddenly, every voice stops, except one. A single voice remains. The voice says, "Can you hear us?" The recording ends. Investigators never identified the speaker, but listeners reported something disturbing. Different people heard different voices: a father, a daughter, a brother, a spouse, a friend, someone familiar, someone trusted, someone gone. Years later, no official explanation exists. No agency has accepted responsibility. No suspect has ever been identified. No technical explanation has survived scrutiny. And perhaps most disturbing of all, the missing people remain missing. No bodies, no evidence, no answers, only recordings, warnings, and questions. Questions investigators eventually stopped asking, because every investigation led to the same conclusion. The broadcast wasn't the danger. The broadcast was protection. Someone, or something, was trying to keep people alive, trying to stop them from answering, trying to stop them from acknowledging whatever was calling. In 2029, a former communications analyst anonymously uploaded one final document. The file disappeared less than 20 minutes later, but screenshots survived. Most of the document was heavily redacted, except for one sentence, a sentence allegedly recovered from an unreleased transmission. It read, "They imitate the dead because the living don't answer." No explanation followed, no context, just that sentence. And according to those who saw it, that was the moment investigators stopped searching for the missing people. Because they realized something horrifying. The missing people may never have been the target. The people who remained might be. Ethan Walker never publicly spoke about the incident again. He stopped giving interviews. He stopped responding to investigators. And 2 years later, he quietly left paramedic work altogether. Former co-workers later described a man who had become obsessed with silence. According to those who knew him, Ethan kept every window in his home permanently covered. Every curtain remained closed. every blind remained shut. And every year on November 14th, he turned off every phone, every radio, every television, every device is capable of receiving a signal. No one ever learned why, because Ethan never explained it. But one former coworker claimed he heard Ethan say something during a night shift years later. A sentence that was never officially recorded. A sentence Ethan reportedly whispered while staring out a dark hospital window. He said, "The warning wasn't for us." Then he refused to explain further. In March of 2031, a recording surfaced on an abandoned server. The file contained no metadata, no upload history, no source, just audio. The recording begins with static, then a weak voice emerges, distant, broken, almost impossible to hear. The voice says, "Please don't answer them." Investigators initially dismissed it as another hoax, until audio analysis identified the speaker. According to leaked reports, the voice belonged to Michael Harper, the Kentucky victim, the same Michael Harper who disappeared 7 years earlier. Then the voice says one final sentence, a sentence authorities have never publicly addressed. The voice whispers, "We never left." The file ends. So if you ever wake up in the middle of the night and hear someone calling your name outside, don't assume you know who's speaking. Don't assume you know what you're hearing. And whatever you do, don't answer. Because according to the only warning that ever appeared, the people who answered never came back. If you enjoyed tonight's story, subscribe for more psychological horror, dark mysteries, and disturbing investigations every week. And before you leave, tell me honestly, if you heard the voice of someone you lost, calling your name from outside tonight, would you answer?